Lena groggily opened her eyes, squinting at the unfamiliar surroundings. Her head throbbed with the weight of a hangover, and her heart raced as confusion swept over her. She was lying in a bed she didn't recognize, with a faint scent of aftershave hanging in the air. The dim light streaming through the curtains made everything feel surreal. She turned her head to the side, and that's when she saw him. A man lying next to her, his eyes still closed, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The memory from last night came flooding back like a tidal wave. The dare. The drunken laughter. The wild night in Vegas. And the wedding? What the hell, she muttered, sitting up quickly, the sheets falling from her bare shoulders. The man stirred, his eyes slowly opening as he stretched lazily. Morning, beautiful. Lena blinked, completely thrown off. What are you doing here? He chuckled softly, his voice husky with sleep. Same thing you are, I imagine. Her eyes widened. Wait a second. Her hand shot up to her head, trying to gather the scattered fragments of her memory. Did we get married? His smirk widened, and he pushed himself up on one elbow, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse spike. Yep. You dared me, and I accepted. He paused, his gaze flickering down to her lips for just a second before meeting her eyes again. And now, I don't want a divorce. Lena's stomach flipped. She narrowed her eyes, trying to keep her composure. You're insane. I think we both are, he replied with a wink, his fingers lightly brushing a strand of hair from her face, the touch sending a spark through her. But here's the thing. I'm not letting you walk away that easily. You're stuck with me now, whether you like it or not. Stuck. She lifted an eyebrow, her heart racing from the mixture of anger and something else, something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. You think you can just waltz in and make demands like that? His smile only deepened, and before she could blink, he was sitting up fully, his arm reaching out to tug her toward him. The proximity had her breath hitching. I don't just think it. I know it. She met his gaze, her mind still reeling from the shock, but his presence was impossible to ignore. The tension in the air shifted, and for a moment, there was no escaping the chemistry sparking between them. I'm not going to just go along with this, you know. She tried to sound firm, but even as she spoke, the pull between them became undeniable. Let's make it interesting then. His voice lowered, and his lips brushed her ear as he added, how about we see where this crazy ride takes us? Who knows? You might just like being stuck with me. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, Lena thought about pushing him away. But something about the challenge in his eyes, the intensity of his touch, made her pause. There was more to him than the stranger beside her. She didn't know what, but she could feel it. I don't play games, she said, trying to sound indifferent, though she could feel her resolve weakening under the weight of his gaze. He smiled, the corner of his mouth curving in a way that made her pulse race again. Neither do I, Lena. But sometimes, life has a funny way of throwing us exactly what we need, even if we don't realize it at first. And in that moment, as his lips brushed hers in a slow, deliberate kiss, Lena knew that her life was about to be anything but ordinary. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tangled in the sheets as she tried to piece together the mess she'd found herself in. She could still feel the lingering warmth of his touch from their kiss, and the way he looked at her made her heart beat faster. What do you think we should do now? She asked, her voice more hesitant than she liked. She turned to face him, expecting him to brush it off, but instead, he looked thoughtful, the cocky smirk gone for a moment. I think, he said slowly, we take this one step at a time. Lena crossed her arms over her chest, studying him intently. Step by step? You've got to be kidding me. This is a mess. We're married, but I don't even know your last name. Fair point, he said with a lazy grin, propping himself up on one elbow. I'm Adrian. Adrian Hawk. Her brow furrowed as she absorbed the name. Hawk. You're not exactly a name dropper, huh? He shrugged nonchalantly. I like keeping a low profile. Not everyone needs to know everything about me. Well, I think we need to start with the basics if we're supposed to get through this without killing each other, Lena said, standing up and pacing a little. What's the plan, Adrian? We can't just pretend this never happened. Adrian swung his legs over the side of the bed, standing up slowly and walking toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm not suggesting we pretend anything. I'm just saying, let's give this a shot. See if the whole marriage thing actually works. I'm not going to make it easy for you to walk away. Lena swallowed hard, feeling the heat between them again. She could feel his presence pressing against her, an unspoken challenge hanging in the air. What exactly does giving this a shot mean? She asked, trying to mask the growing tension in her chest. Adrian stepped closer, his voice lowering, his breath warm against her ear. It means, Lena, we get to know each other. We figure out what works between us. And if we decide it's not working, then we'll deal with it. But you're not leaving just because it's complicated. I want to see where this goes. His words made her pulse race. She should be angry. Hell, she was angry, but something about him, something about this impossible situation, felt inevitable. Lena took a deep breath and stepped back, finding her voice again. I don't even know if I trust you. And I don't expect you to, Adrian said, his eyes dark with intensity. But trust comes with time. And right now, all we have is time. Let's make the most of it. He took a step closer, his eyes locking with hers. For a second, the world outside the room seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them standing on the edge of something that neither of them could name. Lena looked away, trying to ignore the pull she felt toward him. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to throw herself into something she couldn't control. But Adrian, he was different, something dangerous and exciting that she couldn't resist. Fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We'll see how this goes. Adrian's smile returned, slow and triumphant. That's all I needed to hear. He reached for her, his hand gently brushing her arm, and Lena couldn't help the shiver that ran down her spine. He was dangerous, she knew that. But there was something in the way he looked at her, something raw and real, that made her want to stay. He leaned in again, this time slower, more deliberate, and as his lips brushed hers once more, Lena realized that her life had just turned upside down. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blurring into the next as Lena tried to adjust to her new reality. Adrian, despite his cocky attitude, seemed intent on proving that he wasn't just some guy she'd drunkenly married in Vegas. But every time she tried to draw a line in the sand, he would step right over it, with that infuriating smile of his and that unspoken promise that things were far from over. They were in a cozy cafe one afternoon, the sun streaming through the windows, casting a soft glow on their table. Lena stirred her coffee absently, trying not to meet Adrian's gaze as he casually leaned back in his chair, his eyes locked on her with that familiar intensity. You know, this is kind of surreal, she said, finally breaking the silence. You're here. And we're married. But we barely know anything about each other. Adrian raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of his own drink. You're just realizing that now? She glared at him, annoyed by his teasing. You know what I mean. He smirked, setting down his cup, his gaze never leaving hers. Well, I don't see why we need to rush into anything. We've got time. And besides, he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make her heartbeat quicken. Getting to know each other can be fun. Lena's pulse raced despite herself, and she quickly looked away, pretending to focus on her coffee. Fun, huh? Well, let's see if it stays fun when you have to deal with my quirks. Adrian chuckled, his voice smooth as silk. Oh, I'm counting on it. I think I'm beginning to like your quirks. The way he said it, like he was already claiming parts of her she wasn't ready to give, made her heart stutter in her chest. She didn't want to feel this way. She didn't want to feel drawn to him. But he was relentless, and every conversation with him made her feel like she was unraveling in a way she hadn't expected. So, tell me something real, Adrian continued, his voice serious now. What do you really want, Lena? You've got a lot of fire in you, and I can tell there's more to you than what you show on the surface. What's underneath? She felt the weight of his words settle over her. It was almost too much. She wasn't used to being vulnerable, not with anyone. But something about Adrian, his unspoken challenge, his unwavering attention, made her want to let him in. "I want control," she said quietly, surprising herself with the honesty. "I want to know that nothing can slip away from me. I've built my life that way, kept everything in line. But now this marriage, it's not something I expected, and I don't know how to handle it." Adrian's expression softened slightly, and he leaned forward, his hand brushing against hers across the table. "You don't have to handle it alone." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. She hadn't expected that. He wasn't just playing games. There was something real there, something deeper. "I'm not saying I'm ready to let this be easy," she added, still wary, though her breath had quickened at the closeness between them. "But I'm not exactly going to run either. You're not going to get rid of me that easily." Adrian's lips curled into a slow, satisfied smile. "Good. Because I wasn't planning on letting you go." There was again the undeniable heat, the electricity between them. It was more than just physical attraction. It was something deeper, something neither of them could name yet, but they both felt it in the way their bodies responded to one another. "So, tell me, Lena," Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous. "What happens next?" Lena inhaled sharply, her mind swirling with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. She could feel the weight of the question. It wasn't just about the marriage anymore. It was about everything. The danger, the excitement, the possibility of something neither of them could predict. "I guess," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We keep going. One day at a time." Adrian's grin widened, the challenge in his eyes still present, but there was something more, something softer, as if he was genuinely enjoying the journey they were starting to share. "One day at a time," he echoed. "I like that." The days following their conversation at the cafe felt like a strange mix of tension and excitement. Lena tried to convince herself that she was in control of the situation, but each moment with Adrian threw her off balance. His unpredictable nature, his charm, the way he always seemed to know exactly what to say, it was all too much. One evening, a week after their impromptu marriage, Lena came home to find Adrian standing in the doorway of their apartment, a serious look on his face. He'd never been this serious before, and something in the way he stood there made her uneasy. "Adrian," Lena asked, her voice uncertain. "What's going on?" He didn't immediately answer. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes scanning her face, as if he was looking for something. "Lena," he finally said, his tone darker than usual, "I think it's time you knew something about me." Her heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment, his hand running through his hair. "I'm not who I said I was." "Not exactly, anyway." Lena's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" Adrian took a deep breath. "I never told you the full story. My name is Adrian Hawk, yes, but I'm not just some guy who lives in Vegas and likes to have a good time. I've got a past. One that's messy, complicated, and dangerous." Lena took a step back, a cold shiver running down her spine. "Dangerous? What do you mean by that?" He exhaled sharply, his expression hardening. "I've got ties to people, powerful people. People who won't hesitate to use us to get what they want. I didn't want to bring you into it, but now," he shook his head. "Now I can't keep you in the dark anymore." Lena's mind raced, and her hands clenched into fists. "What does that have to do with us? Why tell me now?" "I didn't want you to know," he said, his voice soft but intense. "I was hoping I could keep you safe. But you're involved now, whether you like it or not. And I'll do anything to protect you, Lena." Her chest tightened as she processed the gravity of his words. She had married a man with ties to people who operated in the shadows, people who would stop at nothing to control him, and by extension, her. She could feel her world tilting, threatening to fall apart under the weight of his confession. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I didn't ask for any of this, Adrian." "I know," he said quietly, his gaze softening. "But now that you're in, I'll protect you, whatever it takes." Lena stood there in stunned silence, her thoughts spinning. She didn't know if she could trust him. The idea of a man with such a dangerous past was terrifying. And yet, despite everything, she felt an undeniable pull toward him. The way he looked at her, the way he always had her back, even when it was clear that he was holding something back. "Do you have a plan?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Adrian's jaw clenched, and he nodded slowly. "I have a few ideas, but I need you to stay with me. Stay close. I won't be able to protect you if you're not by my side." Lena felt her heart rate spike. "You want me to stay with you? For how long?" "Until we figure this out," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Until it's safe." For the first time since their marriage, Lena realized just how little she knew about this man and how deep the danger went. A week later, the tension between Lena and Adrian had reached a boiling point. They hadn't spoken much since his confession, and Lena had kept her distance, processing everything. She couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was closing in on them, and it wasn't just his past she had to worry about. It was the present. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Lena's phone buzzed with a message. Her eyes darted to the screen, her stomach sinking when she saw the name. Mark. Her heart skipped a beat. Mark was her brother-in-law, Asha's husband, and he worked as a high-ranking officer in the police force. He had no idea what had really happened in Vegas. He had no idea that she was married to Adrian. The message read, "I need to talk. It's about Adrian. Stay safe." Lena's blood ran cold. Adrian had warned her that his past could be dangerous. But this? She wasn't ready for this. "Adrian," she said quietly, turning to him, "we need to talk." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" Lena's mind raced. Mark had always been a solid, dependable presence in her life, but now she was beginning to wonder if his connection to her would put both of them at risk. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. Their lives were about to collide in ways neither of them could predict. "I just got a message from Mark," she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "He knows something about you." Adrian froze, his gaze darkening. "What did he say?" "He says we need to stay safe," Lena replied, her pulse quickening. "Adrian, what are you involved in?" Adrian stood up, his posture rigid. "It's worse than I thought. We don't have much time. Get your things. We're leaving." The sudden urgency in his voice sent a chill down Lena's spine. "Leaving? Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe. Trust me, Lena. Please." And just like that, everything they had built together, everything they'd started, was put to the test. The twists and turns had just begun, and Lena had no idea what the next chapter of their story would bring. Lena didn't know what scared her more, the fact that Mark had sent that message or the way Adrian reacted to it. He wasn't just cautious. He was on high alert, like a man who had been running from something for a long time and had just realized his past had finally caught up to him. "Adrian," she said, grabbing his arm as he threw a duffel bag over his shoulder. "We need to slow down. You're acting like someone is after us." He turned to face her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Someone is after us, Lena. And if Mark knows something, that means we don't have much time." Her stomach twisted. "Who's after you?" He clenched his jaw, hesitating for just a moment before finally answering. "A man named Victor D'Amato." Lena's breath hitched. She wasn't deep in the world of crime, but that name was infamous. Victor D'Amato was a powerful figure with ties to underground dealings, dangerous, ruthless, and known for making people disappear. "You're telling me we're tangled up with him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's complicated. I used to do some work for him, nothing illegal, but I knew too much. When I left, he wasn't exactly thrilled about it. I thought I had put enough distance between us, but if Mark is warning you, that means Victor has found us." Lena's heart pounded. This wasn't just about a drunken marriage anymore. This was life or death territory. "So, what's the plan? Running forever?" "No," Adrian said firmly. "I just need to figure out what Victor wants and how much danger we're in. Until then, we need to stay off the radar." Lena swallowed hard, trying to process everything. She had always been in control of her life, making calculated decisions to ensure her safety. But now, she was married to a man with a dangerous past, running from someone who could destroy them both. And yet, the scariest part wasn't the danger, It was the way her heart still raced whenever Adrian looked at her, like she was the only thing that mattered. "Fine," she finally said. "I'll go with you. But you owe me the truth. No more half explanations." Adrian studied her for a moment before nodding. Agreed. They drove through the night, leaving behind the city's glowing lights and heading toward the countryside. Adrian's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his eyes scanning the road like he expected something to happen at any moment. Lena sat beside him, arms crossed, trying to push down the panic rising in her chest. "So what now? Are we just going to hide out in some cabin in the woods?" "Something like that," Adrian muttered. "I have a place. Safe, off-grid." Lena scoffed. "You really planned for something like this, didn't you?" Adrian's lips curled into a wry smile. "You don't grow up around people like Victor without preparing for worst-case scenarios." Before Lena could respond, the sound of an approaching engine roared behind them. Adrian's eyes flicked to the rear-view mirror, his body going rigid. "Damn it," he muttered. Lena turned to look and felt her stomach drop. A black SUV was speeding toward them, headlights flashing aggressively. "Tell me that's just some guy in a hurry," she whispered. Adrian pressed down on the gas. "It's not." The SUV swerved to the side, trying to cut them off. Lena gripped the edge of her seat, heart hammering in her chest. "They're trying to run us off the road." Adrian cursed under his breath and yanked the wheel to the side, narrowly avoiding a collision. "Hold on." The SUV accelerated again, pulling up beside them. Lena barely had time to react before the window rolled down and a masked man aimed a gun directly at them. "Get down," Adrian shouted. A gunshot rang out, shattering the back window. Lena screamed, ducking just as Adrian swerved violently to the right. The car fishtailed, tires screeching against the pavement. Another shot fired, barely missing them. Adrian clenched his jaw. "I'm ending this." Before Lena could ask what he meant, he slammed the brakes. The SUV, caught off guard, sped ahead of them, just for a second. But it was enough. Adrian yanked the wheel, cutting behind them and ramming their bumper into the SUV's side. The black car skidded, swerving wildly before losing control and crashing into the guardrail. Lena stared, her breath coming in short gasps. "Holy." "Hold on," Adrian warned, speeding away before anyone could recover. For several moments, the only sound was the wind whipping through the broken window. Lena turned to Adrian, still catching her breath. "What the hell was that?" "Victor's men," Adrian muttered. "They found us faster than I expected." Lena swallowed hard. "So now what?" Adrian exhaled sharply, his grip on the wheel tightening. "Now? We make them regret coming after us." Lena stared at him, pulse still racing. This wasn't the man she had drunkenly married in Vegas. This was someone else. And she wasn't sure if she should be afraid of him, or afraid of just how much she wanted to trust him. The safe house Adrian had mentioned wasn't what Lena expected. It wasn't some abandoned shack in the woods or a grimy hideout. It was a luxurious cabin, tucked away in the mountains, far from civilization. The moment they stepped inside, Lena's head spun. High-end furniture, a fireplace crackling in the corner, a fully stocked bar. It was a place designed for someone who knew the value of comfort, even while on the run. Lena crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes at Adrian. "For a guy running from a crime boss, you sure know how to live well." Adrian smirked, setting down his duffel bag. "You'd be surprised what kind of life skills you pick up when you work for dangerous men." Lena didn't laugh. Instead, she stepped closer, her gaze sharp. "I need more than cryptic answers, Adrian. If I'm risking my life just by being next to you, then I deserve the full truth." Adrian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "All right. You want the truth? Then sit down." Lena hesitated before lowering herself onto the couch. Adrian poured himself a drink, then, after a pause, poured one for her too. He handed it over, and she took it without a word. Then he spoke. "I used to be Victor D'Amato's fixer." Lena frowned. "Fixer?" "I handled problems, cleaned up messes, got people out of trouble, or put them in trouble, depending on what Victor wanted." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "But I never killed anyone." That was my line. And when I decided I wanted out, Victor didn't take it well. Lena let his words sink in. So you ran. I disappeared, Adrian corrected. Burned my old connections, changed my identity, built a new life. And for a while it worked, until Lena's stomach twisted. Until me. Adrian's gaze locked onto hers, intense and unreadable. Until us. Victor has eyes everywhere. He found out about our little Vegas wedding and decided it was the perfect leverage to drag me back. Lena swallowed hard. So, I'm a target now. Adrian's jaw tightened. I won't let him touch you. A long silence stretched between them. Lena's mind whirled. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But under all of that fear, there was something else, a dangerous thrill, a sense that she was standing at the edge of something electrifying and unknown. Adrian was dangerous, but he was also the only person who could keep her safe. And the way he looked at her, as if she was the only thing anchoring him in this chaos, made her pulse quicken. Lena took a slow sip of her drink. So, what now? Adrian leaned forward, his voice low and deadly. Now, we make Victor believe he can control us. And then, when he least expects it, his lips curled into a smirk. We destroy him. Lena's breath caught. We. You wanted in, didn't you? Adrian's eyes darkened with something unreadable. You wanted the truth. Well, this is the truth. The only way out is to take him down first. And I need you to trust me. Lena held his gaze, searching for any sign of hesitation. There was none. This was reckless. Insane. But so was waking up married to a stranger in Vegas. Lena set her glass down and leaned forward. Fine. But if we're doing this, then you'd better not leave me behind. Adrian's smirk softened into something warmer. I wouldn't dare. The air between them crackled. Lena wasn't sure if it was adrenaline, the whiskey, or just the fact that she was starting to see Adrian in a completely different light. He wasn't just a man with a dangerous past. He was her husband. And whether they had meant to or not, they were in this together. The next day, Adrian disappeared for a few hours, saying he needed to contact an old informant. When he returned, he tossed a sleek black envelope onto the table in front of Lena. She picked it up, frowning. What's this? An invitation, Adrian said, his voice edged with tension. Victor's throwing a private event in 2 days. A high-stakes poker game, exclusive guest list, security everywhere. Lena's stomach flipped. And you want us to go? Adrian leaned against the table, arms crossed. It's the only way to get close to him. To figure out what his next move is before he makes it. Lena stared at the invitation, her heart pounding. This was insane. But then again, so was everything about her life right now. She looked up at Adrian, determination burning in her chest. All right. But if we're doing this, we're doing it together. Adrian's lips quirked up in that dangerously charming smirk. That's my girl. Lena rolled her eyes, but she couldn't fight the heat rising to her cheeks. She had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was certain. She and Adrian were about to play a game far more dangerous than poker. And the stakes? Their lives. The grand casino shimmered with luxury, crystal chandeliers, golden accents, and the quiet hum of wealth and power. The air was thick with cigar smoke and whispered deals, a place where fortunes were won and lost in a heartbeat. Lena walked beside Adrian, her arm looped through his, her heart pounding. She wore a sleek black dress, high slit revealing just enough to turn heads, and a confidence she didn't quite feel. Adrian, in a tailored black suit, looked every bit the powerful, untouchable man he needed to be. But beneath the act, she knew what they were walking into. A trap. Victor D'Amato sat at the center of the room, a king surveying his empire. He was older than she expected, his presence commanding, eyes sharp enough to see through any lie. Adrian, Victor greeted smoothly as they approached. I was beginning to think you were hiding from me. Adrian smirked. I didn't think you missed me. Victor's gaze slid to Lena, his smirk deepening. And this must be the wife. What an interesting choice. Lena held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. Pleasure's all mine. Victor chuckled. I like her. His amusement didn't reach his eyes. Shall we play? The poker game began. Adrian played effortlessly, matching Victor's confidence, but Lena could feel the tension beneath the surface. This wasn't about money. It was a battle of control. Then, Victor leaned back, throwing a casual glance at Adrian. Let's stop pretending, shall we? You're here for something, and I already know what it is. Lena's breath caught. Adrian's hand curled into a fist on the table. Victor smirked. You want your freedom. Her freedom. He tilted his head. But why would I let you go when you're so useful to me? Adrian's voice was steady. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you lose everything. Victor chuckled darkly. You always had a sharp tongue. But tell me, Adrian, do you trust her? His eyes flicked to Lena. Because I have a little surprise for you. He gestured, and a guard stepped forward, holding a phone. The screen lit up. Lena's stomach dropped. It was Mark, tied to a chair, bruised, blood trailing from his temple. Victor's voice was smooth. He warned your little wife, didn't he? He tried to protect her. That was a mistake. Lena's pulse thundered in her ears. You bastard. Victor smirked. Now, Adrian, you have a choice. He spread his hands. You walk away, work for me again, and she gets to live a comfortable life. Or, he pulled a gun from his jacket, placing it on the table. You can fight back, but I promise you won't make it out of here alive. The room tensed. Adrian's jaw clenched. Lena could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was weighing the impossible options. Then, before Victor could react, Lena grabbed the gun. A split second. That's all it took. She spun, aimed, and fired. A guard dropped to the ground. Chaos erupted. Adrian moved like lightning, flipping the table, grabbing another gun from a fallen guard. He shot twice, clean, precise. Lena ducked as bullets flew past her. Adrian pulled her against him, shielding her as they moved. Victor was gone. He had slipped away in the chaos. We need to get to Mark, Lena gasped. Adrian nodded. Let's end this. Victor's warehouse was heavily guarded. But Adrian had been trained for this. He moved like a ghost, taking down guards swiftly. Lena wasn't useless, either. She had a gun now, and adrenaline burned through her veins. They reached the main room. Mark was there, still tied up. And Victor stood beside him, gun in hand. You really don't give up, Victor said, sighing. You could have had a good life, Adrian. Adrian's grip tightened on his gun. I already do. Victor chuckled. Do you? His gaze slid to Lena. Because I know people like you. You think she'll stay when this is over? When she sees the real you? Lena's pulse pounded. Victor smirked. Tell me, sweetheart, when this is done, will you still love him? Silence. Then, Lena raised her gun. I already do. She pulled the trigger. Victor staggered back, eyes wide. Blood spread across his chest. He gasped, trying to speak, but no words came. Then he collapsed. It was over. Days later, the sun set over the mountains, golden light filtering through the cabin's windows. Lena stood outside, arms wrapped around herself. Adrian stepped beside her, silent for a moment before speaking. Do you regret it? She turned to him. Regret what? Staying. Lena exhaled. I didn't stay because I had no choice, Adrian. She reached for his hand. I stayed because I chose to. Adrian searched her face. Even after everything? She smiled softly. Especially after everything. His breath hitched. Then, before she could say another word, he pulled her into a deep, desperate kiss. She melted into him, knowing this was where she belonged. Danger had brought them together. But love would keep them standing. Forever.